On today's Film and Whiskey, we are talking about a new movie. Can you guys believe it? Brad went to the movie theater and saw Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I've been twice now, and I have spent, Brad, 6 hours watching this movie this week. So
you sure have.
I feel qualified. To talk about it. We'll give you all of our Odyssey thoughts right after this. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome into the Film and Whiskey podcast. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we are back, Brad, with another special bonus episode. A man, a horse, a beach, a whiskey.
I will say, we don't have any special whiskey prepared for today, but I did decide that I would drink in honor of Odysseus my briniest whiskey. I am drinking the Ardbeg Uigeadail today, Bob.
My briniest whiskey. I love that. And in honor of me being up late watching this movie yesterday, I'm drinking coffee. So I'm excited to dive in and talk about this with you, Brad. Right before we pressed record, I said, this might be the most spontaneous I've ever seen you be when it comes to a movie, which is I both feel like I've made progress with you, and I feel slightly pissed off because, how many times have I had to pull teeth to get you to watch movies? And then out of nowhere at 9 o'clock last night, you're like, I should go see The Odyssey. And then you did.
I did. I had a friend call me and say, hey, the movie starts in 15 minutes. Do you want to come watch the movie with us? And I said, Haley is 15 minutes away from home from work. Let me call her. And she was like, yeah, I'll go to bed. You go watch your movie. Have a good time. And just on an absolute whim, I went. Now, I will say, Bob, I resent a little bit that you say it's like pulling teeth to get me to watch a movie, because of my own volition, I have used my agency in this world to watch one movie a week for the last 7 years.
This is true. I guess mentally I do treat that as if we are bound to watch those movies and not of our own volition. So yeah, that makes sense. Fair point. But I think expanding beyond podcast movies, it's always hard to throw a recommendation out there and see if you ever go watch it because you're a busy man. And I think that an occasion like this is what typically gets you excited to go out to the movies. You know, it's usually a Mission Impossible or a Nolan movie or something like that. So, Brad, you'd heard my initial takes on The Odyssey because I got to go to the press screening last Monday. And I kind of came out after my first review of it. You can see that on the Film and Whiskey website. My first viewing, I landed at about a 7.5. I thought that this was a big, messy, flawed movie that was still in the vein of something like Oppenheimer. It's certainly in conversation with Oppenheimer, but I thought this was definitely a step down from that. Now, I went and saw it yesterday, unbeknownst to me that you were going to go see it as well, and I have many more thoughts. I'm much higher on this movie after a second viewing, but I guess my first question to you, Brad, is what actually made you excited about going to see this movie? When you didn't know anything other than, I've read The Odyssey and I know Christopher Nolan, is that enough of a draw to get you out of the house? Or what is the pull when it comes to The Odyssey?
I do think part of it is Oppenheimer. For me, it felt like Nolan is hitting his stride as an older director that isn't quite as needing to pursue I don't know, tricksy type of things in his films. When I look back on Inception, I'm like, Inception is made by somebody in their 30s. It's not made by somebody in their 60s, right?
Sure.
Now we have a little bit older Nolan. I'm curious to see where he's going. And Oppenheimer is an absolute freaking masterpiece. So I'm very excited just based on that. I read the Iliad as a 9th grader. I read the Odyssey as a 10th or 11th grader. I was so excited for this that I started rereading the Odyssey. I didn't quite finish it. I got maybe 40 to 50% of the way through. And I will say it's fascinating to me that I read, let's just call it half of the book. Every single thing in the movie is from the first half of the book. Other than his other than his return to Ithaca, every single thing that we saw comes probably in the first like 30% of the book. Which blows my mind that like this ancient song from 3,000 years ago is so epic that a 3-hour Nolan film could only capture like 30 to 40% of the original poem.
I'll be very frank with you. I never had to read Homer at any level of my education. And so like I have a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey on my bookshelf, mostly for decorative purposes, because I've never read them. So like, but what's surprising to me is how much of the story I've picked up throughout the years. Like, you hear about Scylla and Charybdis, and like, so you know some of these stories. I just didn't know that they came directly from the Odyssey. Now, I've also seen a couple Odyssey-based movies in my day. We've reviewed at least one on this podcast in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But even just a couple years ago, there was a really great kind of lower budget movie called The Return, which starred Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche. And it's literally Odysseus washes up on the shores of Ithaca, dresses as a beggar, and has to figure out how to like re-infiltrate his own castle. And it's a very sad and mournful movie. It's very similar to the way that they interpreted that last third of this movie as well. So I went into it with some of these expectations. And I think, Brad, maybe the best place to start here, let's give a disclaimer. There are things that happen in the Odyssey which are very obviously public domain, and we don't have to give spoiler alerts about.
Sure.
But I think that when it comes to the movie itself, there may be some events in the movie that we want to say, hey, we're going to give a spoiler alert here. So maybe let's try to get all of our movie spoiler-free stuff out of the way here, and then let's kind of group that stuff into a chunk a little bit later on here.
I will say, I think spoilers are often considered like story beats, like, oh, such and such kills, Darth Vader ends up being Luke's father. Like that's the spoiler of all spoilers, right?
Thanks for just throwing that out there too.
Yeah,
for those who have not seen that movie. Yeah,
yeah, okay. So I would say, Bob, I think you're going to appreciate this. I think as I get older and I spend a lot more time watching movies, I would actually consider a lot of the things we're going to say to be more of a spoiler, especially for something like the Odyssey. Because everybody knows the bare bones, what's going to happen in the story. For me, I think that our conversation around the color of the film and the movement of the camera and things like that feels like more of a spoiler to me today with this review than it would about other films. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all those biblical epics of the 50s and 60s. And it's like, okay, you've told the story of Jesus 18 times. Now, what distinguishes, we know the story now. So like what distinguishes these movies from each other? And it's how that story is captured on screen. So maybe let's kind of start there, Brad. You've seen the Odyssey now. Obviously, we can talk about some of the small differences from the poem that are made narratively as well. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk more about the visuals of the film, like what Nolan has put on screen here, not least of which because they are touting this IMAX 70 millimeter, that this is the first film completely shot in that IMAX 70 format, not just in snippets or small scenes. And when you spend so much of your marketing capital on it's going to be overwhelming, you're going to die, it's going to be like seeing the face of God, then you're really putting your movie out there for heavy scrutiny when it comes to the visuals. I will start the hot takes machine here today, Brad. And this is not something that is unique to the Odyssey. Ever since Nolan switched cinematographers from Wally Pfister, who he used in his earlier years, to now I think he's using Hoyte van Hoytema, who's won Oscars with him and knows how to set up a shot, right?
Can I just say, as we were leaving the theater, we were still sitting there while the credits were starting to roll. And Hoyte van Hoytema's name came up, and the two buddies that I was with, just out of nowhere, they're just like, what the hell is a Hoyte van Hoytema? Who, like, how in the world did they ever get into the world of cinema? They were just talking trash. And I was like, guys, he's won Oscars.
Like one of the goats at this point. Yeah, right. That's how you know you live in Central Ohio, when Hoytema is the way that you pronounce that.
Hoytema? Oh, we should probably go to Hooters after this, huh?
My hot take is that I dislike. This is like on my Janusz Kaminski thing again.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
I dislike the overall look of Nolan movies now, and I can recognize the mastery of the framing and some of the shots and the way that some of these shots, even in this movie, are artfully composed. But there's a sort of like washed outness and grayness and lack of contrast. In Oppenheimer, you saw it. Even going back to like Dunkirk, you saw this as well. I think Interstellar kind of has some of these issues as well. There's a specific kind of like look to a Nolan movie now that I just don't jive with very much. And to me, it doesn't matter what format you're shooting the movie on. I think that the movie looks kind of ugly. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I was thinking about it. It's hard to get away from any comparisons to Oppenheimer, right? Like, it's his most recent film. I was thinking about Oppenheimer that when I think about World War II as a whole, if I had to put like a color palette on it, I would put like army green, khaki, and like ocean blue.
Earth tone kind of colors.
Yeah, earth tone, soft things. So I'm like, when you look at Oppenheimer, I think the color palette fits perfectly for the era. It gives it a little bit of a dated, almost like a what's the old timey filter that they used to have on Instagram that made everything
like a sepia tone kind of.
It almost feels like a sepia tone, which makes sense. Like, we're looking at something from that era. For this film, I'm thinking about movies that have Heston in it. Like, we're talking Ben-Hur. We're talking these Technicolor, bombastic things. Dude, the only color in this film was like the red on his plume of his Spartan helmet, and it's a completely like dull, dark, matte red that has no vibrancy to it whatsoever. Like, one of the only color choices that I thought was actually bright and vibrant was the black on Agamemnon's armor. Had this like vibrancy to it that I was like, why is black the only color that feels like it's not a matte picture? It's actually like kind of glossy and has some shine to it. Also, let's just talk about rule of cool for a second. I'm sure some people did not like Agamemnon's armor because it looked kind of out of place with everything else in the film. I'm sorry, dude. The fake
awesome.
spine.
It was awesome.
Is freaking incredible,
awesome.
dude.
Here's the thing. In classic people getting outraged online fashion, you know, when a movie that seems more conservative comes out, the liberals get mad online. When a film that seems more liberal comes out, the conservatives get mad online. This time it was more of that because of the casting of Helen of Troy and of Elliot Page. And so I think they wanted to be pissed off about that. And so now they're finding every excuse to get mad. And the big excuse is like, it's not historically accurate.
Yeah.
First of all, this is a made up story.
Yep.
This didn't happen. Folks, I hate to tell you, Cyclopses not walking among us. Like, let's be real here. It does not matter to me how you choose to represent the armor of a culture that is based on reality, but not real. And like, you know, people were talking about the ships and how the ships are basically designed like Viking ships. And I've now heard the rebuttal to that be that, like, we don't have any examples of Greco-Roman ships.
Sure.
For like till, you know, AD 600 or something. So it's just basically like, what would a ship look like that could survive a journey of this magnitude? It probably looked more like a Viking ship. Those are the hardiest ships that you could build. And so they just went with it. And you know what? That did not take me out of the movie whatsoever, Brad.
I will say, within the realm of just the Odyssey, I could give a rip who you cast. I would actually prefer that, like, rather than having like one token ethnic person and everybody else is white, I would almost rather you just say, hey, like, we're just going to cast whoever we think is a good actor for the job. And you end up having one of the slightly less than main characters being Indian, and you have black people and you have white people, and they, like, nobody thinks about it. I would prefer that. I will say, I think the conversation around it is more of what's annoying from a conservative point of view, where it's like Lupita Nyong'o used that exact same argument. They're like, this is a fantasy story with magical gods turning people into pigs and all this stuff. Like, why do you care if they're all white? But then you look at how they treat Moana, and they're like, this is a beautiful story of Polynesian culture, and we have to have every single Polynesian actor, and we cannot have anyone who's not Polynesian, and it would be offensive to have a white person in this movie. And you're like,
right.
So like I said, it's more about the conversation around cinema altogether, where it feels a little bit hypocritical when they do it for a Greek movie, but then for a Polynesian movie, it's like, no. Now, I will give a disclaimer. I'll give a disclaimer to all that. I don't give a rip. If you want to make a Polynesian movie and cast all Polynesians, great. If you want to make a Greek movie and cast a hugely diverse cast, I don't care, Bob. It's totally fine. I just want to watch a good movie.
All right. I feel like we've just been giving kind of like peripheral thoughts on the movie. We haven't actually tackled the movie itself. So if you have not read or seen The Odyssey, I mean, spoilers, quote unquote, for the story of The Odyssey. So picking up after the events of the Iliad and what would become the Aeneid, the Trojan horse is wheeled into Troy, led by our guy Odysseus, who sacks the city of Troy.
Just the way that they set it up.
Oh, we'll get to it. Let's give the plot first.
Sure.
Odysseus and Menelaus storm the city of Troy. Troy is conquered for Agamemnon. And then Odysseus has to get his men home, back to Ithaca. And he decides not to follow Agamemnon and to take some more circuitous path, which ends up basically taking them on a year-long journey where all of his men die except for him. And then he gets stranded for 7 years on the island of the nymph Calypso, which we will also talk about the Calypso of it all, Brad. But it takes him many, many, many years to get home. Because before the sacking of Troy, he had already been gone for 10 years, stuck on the beaches outside of Troy. So there's a 20-year sort of odyssey to get home. And once he gets to Ithaca, he has found that in his absence, there is a power vacuum. His wife is basically being held hostage by a number of suitors. His young son cannot ascend to the throne, and he has to find a way to reclaim his throne and to kill all these suitors who are there for him. That's the basic sort of bones of the Odyssey story. What I found most interesting is the degree to which Nolan kind of wants to dispense with that story and tell a story that only he can tell and only he wants to tell. And I think to your point earlier, Brad, Nolan is arriving at a point in his career where you can tell he's picking his projects based on, does this have the scope of what we've come to know as a Christopher Nolan movie? But also, can I tell this story in such a way that it gets across the central themes that I want to get across? And I will only tell this story in that way. It's a much more sort of like stubborn style of movie making, but it's definitely like if you subscribe to like the auteur theory, I think Oppenheimer and The Odyssey are like the top 2 Nolan movies of all time for what he's doing in that regard. So I know that I'm kind of like rambling now. We can get back to talking about the plot of the movie if you want. What I have found most interesting in thinking about this after a second viewing is kind of all the other stuff besides just the plot mechanics of the movie.
100%. I'm curious. I was watching a video that was talking about like, what's the moral of the story for Lord of the Rings? And it's got me thinking about it for a lot of movies. And I walked away from The Odyssey thinking the same thing. Like, what's the moral of the story? Like if the moral of the story of The Boy Who Cried Wolf is liars can't be trusted even if they're telling the truth, right? That's a lesson we should all learn. Like, don't lie a bunch because you won't get trusted. Like, what's the moral of this story? Because I walked away like he very clearly makes some ideas about hospitality and like human dignity is like the main thing. But he also like throws in a bunch of stuff about like Odysseus being stubborn and defying fate and the gods. And I felt like it got a little muddled at the end of all things. So where are you at on like the theme, the moral of the story that Nolan is trying to tell here?
Yeah, man, I wonder if this is the time to get into all this, because I feel like we usually do our analysis stuff on the back half of our episodes. Let's go ahead and dive into it. I probably sat down yesterday, Brad, and what I've started doing when I need to like publish a movie review, on the way home from the movie theater, I'll just take a voice note and ramp like my stream of consciousness thoughts, and then I'll get home and kind of parse through those. I probably spent 2 hours yesterday developing like my theory of Nolan and what I have felt like where Nolan's arrived at over the years. If you look at his early movies, his first movie Following, not many people have seen, but Memento, Insomnia, and even like Batman Begins. I think Memento is the best example we could talk about, but he gets focused early on, obviously, on this theory of time and the way time, can be manipulated. But he has running through all of his movies this theme of like deception. And I think in the early movies, he likes to focus on the way that people deceive each other and themselves. So Leonard in Memento is deceiving other people, and there's a manipulation of time, but you find by the end of the movie that he's really just been manipulating himself. He deceives himself. You get that a little bit even through the first Batman movie, and definitely The Prestige. I feel like The Prestige is kind of like the last of his early period, where that movie is an interesting like parallel to the Odyssey, because in the Odyssey, like actual magical stuff happens. And in The Prestige, Nolan is very much like, there is no magic. This is all a trick. We've all been deceiving each other, and look at the consequences that it reaps for people. As you start to move into like his middle period, and I think The Dark Knight is a really great example of this. We talked about this on our review of The Dark Knight. The idea of kind of like deception gets tied into the idea of work and duty. And even back then, people started teasing out this thing with Nolan because he seemed to have this big Michael Mann fetish. And we talked about it with The Dark Knight. Like, Michael Mann is a guy who portrays guys that like, they're great at their job. They're stoic, like workman-like people. The Dark Knight is basically a superhero remake of Heat. But it also has this ending that you and I have always grappled with of like the Patriot Act, and is my sense of duty, can it be carried to this logical extreme where then I start to break my own sort of vows and virtues.
Code.
And so he starts to kind of like expand this idea of deception of self and duty and guilt beyond just the individual to like, to what end is this being used? And you kind of carry that through to Inception, where Leonardo DiCaprio is working for this like nameless, faceless entity doing this manipulative, deceptive work that he can never really go home from. He can never really recover from. Even at the end of the movie, you don't know if he reunites with his kids. And I think that sort of like to what end carries through his middle period of films. And now I think we've arrived at this place where Nolan has started thinking about it even in more broad terms than that, which is like, I've been deceiving myself. I think that the work that whether Nolan thinks this about himself or not, I think is an interesting conversation. But his protagonists have moved from just like, I'm deceiving others and myself, to what end is this like having consequences? And then when you get to Oppenheimer, it's a story of a man who is like so dedicated to his work that he naively believes that his work will not have consequences kind of globally or societally. And it's all about the ways that like these big power structures then use that man's own naivete against him to the ends of like, what master am I serving now? Like, it's not just to what end, but am I serving global power structures that ultimately may or may not lead to our doom? And so at the end of Oppenheimer, you get this like, hey, I think we may have set in motion the end of the world. And that's where that movie ends. And then the Odyssey, where this movie ends, and this is where I'll get into like real spoiler territory, Matt Damon is like, hey, this is the end of our civilization. What I have put in motion is not just like a maybe, it's like I have doomed us, because there is this overarching thing called Zeus's law, and I have committed the ultimate violation of that, and there is no, once a society does that, there's no coming back. We are doomed at this point. We're going to go off into exile, and I'm going to tell my wife at the end of the movie, we are bound to keep repeating these mistakes because societies that violate this law will forget that they've done this, and they will like reap destruction on themselves forever. it's like by far his most harrowing and pessimistic ending to a movie. And I think that it is like right in line with all of these movies he's made from the beginning, because it's all about how deception affects ourselves, affects those around us, affects our societies, affects our power structures, and can have civilizational impact at the end of it. It like, in that regard, I think it's a really brilliant movie.
Man, Yeah, Bob, I think I'm with you for the most part. My struggle with the Odyssey is that it once again feels similar to like an Interstellar, where like the dialogue and the story kind of gets in the way of what he's trying to do with his themes. And also like the sound design, like one of the key elements of the film is that this horse, this Trojan horse, is supposed to be a gift from the gods. And yet the sound design was such that I had no idea what Elliot Page was saying. When Elliot Page says the line that's like, "This is a gift from the gods," I'm sorry, all I could hear was like ocean crashing.
Yeah.
And I had absolutely no idea. And so that little piece, which is crucial to the theme of the film, kind of got lost because of the sound design. I think that the idea of deception being so detrimental to society, I don't know if it fully plays through for me, because part of the whole, and this is getting into like the Odyssey itself as a story.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for Zeus's law is because of deception. Like, we never know if this might be a god in disguise.
So
we're going to show them honor, which is kind of like a really crappy way of looking at humans. It's like, oh, if there wasn't a chance that you could be a god, we would put you out on the dung heap.
It's in the Bible, dude. That exact phrase is in the epistles.
Sure. You can play devil's advocate all you want, and you can't convince me that biblical precedent for the dignity of human beings is 1,000,000 times higher.
Sure.
Than Greek culture.
Agreed. Yeah.
And any other culture that has ever existed. I'm just saying, for me, I think the message he was trying to share is like, the dignity of the human matters. And when we throw out hospitality and we deceive one another, that's what breaks things. But then you also get him like throwing in random like feminist, like, what do you think? You can rule just because you have a few hairs on your chin, and I've been ruling here for 20 years and nobody's going to honor me. And like, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, Penelope has zero character. They give her zero screen time, and then she spouts this and then disappears for the rest of the movie. And I'm like, I don't quite know what Penelope was doing. I think that you also mix it up with like Odysseus making weird decisions out of nowhere. I think that's one of my most frustrating things, is that in staying faithful to the source text, which portrays Odysseus as a very unstable, like, he definitely makes a lot of bad choices throughout the book. When he just randomly decides to be like, hey, we're going to go past the sirens, but I'm not going to plug my ears. You're like within the movie.
Yeah.
It makes absolutely zero sense.
Well, and he also in the movie portrayal of it, he's just watched like 2/3 of his men get killed by those giants.
Yep.
And then like it's almost like a fun game. He's like smiling. He's like, this will be fun. No one's ever done this before. And I'm like,
what?
Tonal whiplash. Yeah. Yes. Tonal whiplash, dude.
Absolutely.
Now, like, one of my big hang-ups on the movie itself is that I feel like you have to really understand the story beats of the Odyssey before going into the movie. You know, most people will have at least some familiarity with those story beats. But once again, you know, the first hour of the movie is where I really felt like it was struggling to find its footing. Now, on a second watch, once I felt like I knew what Nolan's major point and theme were, going back and rewatching this again, it's a much easier watch. everything is geared towards that final reveal of Matt Damon talking to Anne Hathaway, where she realizes we are the people from the sea. Like, we are the threat that we've been afraid of this whole time. And what are the consequences of that? And what is the sort of penance that we have to impose upon ourselves for that? It makes a lot more sense. And watching the sort of Nolan-y timelines overlap is a lot easier to get through. But the first time through, I was like, I straight up disliked the first hour of this movie, Brad. And it wasn't until you had John Bernthal as Menelaus talking to Tom Holland and saying, like, hey, have you heard the story of the Trojan horse from the inside? Cut to smash cut of like a wave coming up on the Trojan horse. The movie really kicks off there. The problem is, like, if you don't know the names of these people, if you don't already have familiarity with Odysseus, Telemachus, Penelope, you know, even like the Cyclops, Agamemnon, you're going to be lost for the first hour of this movie because it falls victim to all those classic Nolan-y, I can't hear the sound mix, I'm not following your dialogue, I don't know the character motivations, and it seems like you're plopping us in media res here.
There's also multiple moments throughout the first 30, 40 minutes of the film, that I felt like I was watching a trailer for the Odyssey.
Yes.
More than I was actually watching the Odyssey. And that completely took me out of the experience and just made me feel like this sense of like, all right, are we going to start soon? Like, where are we going with this? And I say that as somebody who just read it recently, and I knew exactly what he was doing, and he was staying very faithful to the source material, and I was like pumped about it. But man, oh man, there was moments where I'm like, he would cut to something new, and I was like, all right, I just saw the trailer. Like, when are we going to actually start the film?
Every time they get to a new island and there's this new sort of threat that is going to claim some of their lives, I found myself simultaneously like, this is a really cool technical accomplishment. And also, I feel like your movie's losing momentum.
Yes.
Like, the Cyclops sequence is really cool. And I got bored with it after about 5 minutes. I don't like, so it's this weird thing of, I found myself appreciating the craftsmanship of the movie. Similar to what we talked about, I guess our listeners haven't heard yet. We just recorded an episode on the 1933 King Kong.
Yeah.
And how the jankiness of those visuals pulls you out of the verisimilitude of the movie. But also, like, I got sucked back in just because I was like, it's so cool that humans made this.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. I don't know that I want that in a movie made in 2026.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I found myself, by the time they got to the third island that was going to kill them, I found myself just thinking about Monty Python, because they literally run back to the boats like in a dead sprint, like we're all going to die if we don't get back
Run
right
away. Yeah.
That's all I could think about. I also had a moment where they go to the island with Apollo's cows, and like Odysseus knows his men are going to die if they land on this island because eventually they're going to eat the cows, and Apollo and Poseidon are going to get angry with them. When he comes and he finds them eating the cow like in the middle of the island and he looks at him, I was like, this is Moses finding Aaron making the golden calf.
Yeah.
Like absolutely, it felt like this biblical like dad moment of like, really, guys, I told you.
I also love that he's like, did you think that if you ate quietly, the gods wouldn't hear you?
Which brings me to another point. I think that might be the only joke in the entire movie.
There's a couple, and it's funny because with one audience that I saw the movie with, all the laugh lines got chuckles, and with the second audience, none of them. So, like, when they go to the witch's island, Circe, and again, I guess this is a spoiler. You have to see it for yourself. Incredible body horror moments. Yeah. The sound design of bones crunching, and so, oh, it's freaking great.
Don't like that.
But then you get to the moment where Odysseus is asking her, why do you keep your sister as a crow? Why not change her back? And she just goes, we get on better this way. Like, that line got a big laugh in my first theater. Yeah, oh yeah, dude.
Oh,
yeah,
to me that was a continuation of the dour tone of the entire movie, where it's like a mourning of what could have been, and yet this is how we get along better. To me, that was a not a funny line in the slightest.
And again, I think that like every complaint we have with the movie is a purposeful choice. Like Nolan doesn't do anything without deciding to do it. The desaturated color palette, the sort of dourness of the whole film, it all traces back to that final image he wants to leave you with, where he says, society will do this all over again and they will forget our mistakes. And it's a shot of the Trojan horse burning, cut to black. Like that's the image he wants to leave you with. It's essentially the same ending as Oppenheimer. Like it's meant to be that gut punch.
It reminds me of like a Planet of the Apes, like on the beach, just yelling and raging at what humanity has done.
Yeah. Brad, before we get out of here, I think that we need to give some let's give basic thoughts on the cast, because it's a stacked cast. Matt Damon at the top, Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, John Bernthal, Lupita Nyong'o, Charlize Theron. I mean, I'm like, that's just off the top of my head. Those would be like my top 6 people, I guess. But part of the issue I had with the film itself is that it's not a showcase for performances the way that Oppenheimer was. And it's because with Oppenheimer, most of that movie is people talking in rooms. And it does build suspense, but as the scope of that movie broadens, which is like, we thought we were just making a little bomb in our little room, and actually we ended the world. You never see outside of that narrow scope. Like the realization hits Oppenheimer, but everything still stays very contained. And because of that, it's a showcase for these performances. Whereas this movie, everything's big, and the reveal becomes a very interior realization. But I think because the scope of the movie is so big, it overwhelms the performances. And so I think everyone in this movie was good. I didn't walk out of this movie thinking anyone did a bad job. I also think that like it might be an uphill battle for some of these performers to really hang their hat on like, this is my Cillian Murphy Oppenheimer role.
Yeah, I found myself near the end of the film being like, I want to say that Matt Damon's really great in this movie, but I don't know if he's doing anything that I'm like blown away by. I want to say that Tom Holland's really great in this movie, but the movie's not, weirdly, it feels like it's not about the people as much, which is like...
No, it's about the idea.
It's about the idea, and I think that is my biggest frustration with the film, is that the reason most people have read and know about the Odyssey over the Iliad is because the Iliad is this grand, massive story about these titanic wills and this clash of two civilizations and all these things. Whereas the Odyssey is a very intimate portrait of a man and his wife and his son and their growth and a coming of age story and a coming home story. And it's a very intimate portrait.
Yep.
And you don't really get that in this movie. And that, I think that's what I walked away from, being like, there's no color and depth and beauty to this film. It's just about the message. And I think that to take the Odyssey, which is about the color and depth and beauty and richness of life, and to reduce it down to, if you don't show hospitality, civilization is going to end. I think I was kind of disappointed by this movie.
Yeah, I think that there's one more layer of interesting like psychoanalysis you can do on Nolan. And somebody on Twitter was mentioning this, and it's not the first time it's been said, but like Nolan's protagonists have been read as stand-ins for Nolan for a long time. I mean, if you look at DiCaprio's hair in Inception, it's like, oh, okay, this is how Christopher Nolan views himself, right?
Yeah.
And there's always been this sense of like, we think, reading the texts, Nolan feels guilty about the fact that he is an obsessive workman, and his work takes him away from his family, and he feels a tremendous sense of guilt for that. And I think watching these last few films, as he's interrogated that sense of guilt within himself, I think you can read this movie now as like, holy shit, like not only have I been failing myself and my family, but like have I and my generation like screwed up the world irrevocably for the next generations. I think Nolan is in a place where he's really thinking about what world are we leaving behind to our kids. And so as an exploration of what's actually important to Nolan, that's where I think the value of this movie lies. Now, I'm with you, Brad, in that, like, if you're just going to have like an escapist time at the movies, this is like a 7.5.
Yeah.
But watching it the second time with all this in mind, I've been up and down on Nolan throughout his career. And I found this a way more fascinating exercise in like, this is like Fableman's level. This guy is opening himself up to me. And he did it by spending $200 million of someone else's money. And it's really cool. It's a grand experiment. And I think that's where the value of this movie lies for me, Brad.
I still, though, like the idea that like me and my generation have screwed up the world for everyone else. Like, you're making a movie about a story from 3,000 years ago about how Agamemnon and Hector and whoever the king of Troy was, like how they screwed up the world for everybody. And yet the next generations figured it out and they made their own mistakes. And then the next generations figured it out and they made their own mistakes. And like, to me, the outlook of this movie, if it really is Nolan saying, like, look at my generation and what we did wrong, feels like a really narcissistic, prideful take. And to not only say that, but then also say, and the world we live in is drained of all color and vibrancy and life and hope. I walked away from this movie being like, is there any vibrancy to life? And it's like, I think that there is. I think there absolutely is. And I think that it is the depth of brokenness that we experience on a hero's journey like Odysseus that brings about the vibrancy of life. And yet this movie ends with this really awkward, like, Odysseus is dying and about to die. He has an arrow in his freaking neck in 3000 BC when they don't have antiseptics and two sticking out of his back. And then she's like, don't die. And he goes, oh, I'm not going to die. And then it cuts to him with a giant.
He's just like, good. He's like, let's go sailing.
He's like, let's go sailing.
You know what? This movie, Brad, I forgot to mention this earlier. Nolan is a man of the people, and he is asking the hard questions that all of us have asked ourselves. Namely, would you rather spend 7 years living on a sex island with Charlize Theron, or go sailing around the world and have unlimited sex with Anne Hathaway? Those are really the two options before us all, I would say, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty fair understanding of what it's like to be Christopher Nolan. So
that's the major theme of this film. I'm landing, Brad, on an 8.5 here. I think that it's certainly in conversation with Oppenheimer, especially as an expansion of that idea and this kind of growing fear that I see within Nolan, this existential kind of crisis he's having. I think it's certainly fascinating that way. It is kind of the reversal of Oppenheimer, though, whereas I think Oppenheimer rewards repeated viewings in that it works on many levels, and it works on the most basic level first. And the more you watch it, the more you realize how it's about those themes. Whereas this one, the theme is front and center, and it took me a second viewing to appreciate the performances, to appreciate the editing, the costuming. And I don't know if people are going to want to revisit this one as much as they revisited Oppenheimer. So it's an 8.5, but it's certainly a step below Oppenheimer for me.
I think it's a few steps below Oppenheimer for me. I think that this is like B to C tier Nolan. I am sitting at a 7 out of 10 on this. I think I came in thinking I was at a 7.5. And the more I talk about it, the more I want it to be great. And that's, you and I have talked about this, Bob. It's really hard when other people really like a movie and you come in and you're like, yeah, but, and like, that's just never a fun role to play. And I played it this morning at church with a few friends who also saw it and were like jazzed out of their mind about it. And I was like, well, actually.
Yeah. Well, imagine being in my position, which is like all the reasons that those guys give for why they liked it. I'm like, no. But when you look at it as an academic exercise, it's really cool. It's like, no one wants to listen to that.
You're like, no. So essentially what we're saying is we're old fogies that you don't have to listen to. So thanks for listening this time. Yep. It was great. Thank you for your time. That's our review of the Odyssey, Bob.
Yeah. Guys, we will be back on Tuesday with another regularly scheduled episode. Before we get to that, I'd like to hear people's thoughts on the Odyssey. Perhaps the best place to do that is to find us on our Discord server. Brad and I have been really hitting Discord hard lately. I feel like we had a little dip there in usage, and now we're back on there a lot. And I think this is the best place to have conversations like this. So if you look in our show notes, you can find a link to join our Discord server. If you're not on Discord, you can let us know on social media what you thought of the Odyssey. You can find us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at Film Whiskey. Brad, any final thoughts here?
I'm curious to see what Nolan does next. I think that's the biggest thing is like, I love any director that can bring unique ideas into existence and then get millions of people to go see it. So like in that sense, I am all about the Odyssey. Go see it. Support cinema. It's incredible. I just want Nolan to be better. I hold him to such a high standard.
All right, guys, we'll see you Tuesday. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.